Today, we are diving into one of the most explosive political developments in South Asia in years. On November 17, 2025, a special tribunal in Dhaka handed down a death sentence to Bangladesh's former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, who has been living in exile in India since she was dramatically ousted from power last year. She was convicted in absentia of crimes against humanity for her role in the deadly suppression of student-led protests in 2024, a crackdown that left up to 1,400 people dead, according to United Nations estimates, and ultimately ended her 15-year grip on the country. This is a verdict that has sent shockwaves across the region, with celebrations in the streets of Dhaka, calls for calm from the interim government, and a fresh diplomatic headache between Bangladesh and India. So let's unpack this step by step, from how we got here to what it all means moving forward. First, a quick reminder of who Sheikh Hasina is, because her story is basically the modern history of Bangladesh wrapped into one person. She's the daughter of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, the founding father of the nation who led Bangladesh to independence from Pakistan in 1971, but was assassinated in a military coup just 4 years later, along with most of her family. Hasina herself survived because she was abroad at the time. She returned, entered politics, and became prime minister for the first time in 1996. After losing in 2001, she came back stronger in 2009 and held on to power through 4 consecutive terms until last year. Under her rule, Bangladesh saw incredible economic growth, becoming one of the fastest-growing economies in the world with massive advances in garments, infrastructure, and poverty reduction. But that progress came at a heavy cost. Critics, including human rights groups and opposition parties, accused her of turning increasingly authoritarian, rigging elections, suppressing dissent, jailing opponents, and overseeing enforced disappearances and extrajudicial killings. By 2024, many saw her as untouchable, ruling through her Awami League party with an iron fist. Now, the spark that lit the fuse was a seemingly small issue that ballooned into a nationwide revolution. It started in early 2024 with student protests against a controversial job quota system that reserved 30% of government posts for descendants of 1971 freedom fighters, a policy many young people saw as unfair and nepotistic in a country where youth unemployment was skyrocketing. At first, the protests were peaceful, but the government responded harshly. Police used tear gas, rubber bullets, and then live ammunition. Hasina dismissed the protesters as Razakars, a deeply insulting term referring to collaborators with Pakistan during the Independence War, which only inflamed things further. What became known as the July uprising escalated rapidly as students were joined by ordinary citizens fed up with corruption, economic inequality, and years of repression. Internet blackouts were imposed, curfews enforced, and security forces went all out. Witnesses and investigators later described scenes of chaos, with police and Awami League supporters attacking protesters, hospitals overwhelmed with the injured, and bodies piling up in the streets. The turning point came on August 5, when the protests reached the Prime Minister's residence. Facing a complete breakdown of order and with the military refusing to fire on civilians, Hasina fled by helicopter to India, where she has remained ever since, under New Delhi's protection. In the vacuum that followed, an interim government was formed under Nobel laureate Muhammad Yunus, the microfinance pioneer who had long been a thorn in Hasina's side. One of the student leader's key demands was justice for the victims of the crackdown, and the new authorities moved fast. They revived the International Crimes Tribunal, ironically a court that Hasina herself had established in 2010 to prosecute 1971 war crimes, but which she had been accused of weaponizing against political enemies. Charges were filed against Hasina, her former Home Minister Asaduzzaman Khan, and others for crimes against humanity, including murder, persecution, and other inhumane acts. The prosecution argued that Hasina personally incited and ordered the violence, failing to restrain forces even as the death toll mounted. Key evidence included alleged phone recordings where she reportedly told party leaders to eliminate the protesters, directives to use drones and helicopters for surveillance and attacks, and testimony from survivors and even a former police chief who turned state witness in exchange for a lighter sentence. The trial lasted months, broadcast live in a historic first for Bangladesh, with packed courtrooms and heavy security outside. Hasina refused to return, calling it a kangaroo court and a politically motivated witch hunt by an unelected regime. Her defense, handled by a state-appointed lawyer, argued she acted to restore order against violent agitators backed by opposition forces and even foreign elements. But on November 17, after reading a 400-plus page judgment over several hours, the three-judge panel found her guilty on multiple counts, including incitement, ordering killings, and failing to prevent atrocities. They sentenced her to death, along with her former home minister, while the cooperating ex-police chief got just 5 years. The courtroom erupted in applause from victims' families, many of whom had waited years for this moment, tears streaming down their faces as justice seemed finally within reach. Reactions poured in immediately. The interim government called it a historic day, affirming that no one is above the law. Mohammed Yunus praised the verdict for upholding accountability. Victims' relatives celebrated in the streets, handing out sweets and waving flags, seeing it as vindication for the July uprising. But not everyone was cheering. Hasina released a defiant 5-page statement from India rejecting the ruling as biased vengeance aimed at destroying her Awami League party, insisting she was proud of her human rights record and ready to face a fair tribunal. Her supporters called for protests, and there were clashes in some areas. Human rights organizations had mixed views, welcoming accountability for the victims, but criticizing the use of the death penalty and questioning whether the tribunal, with its controversial past, met full international standards of fairness, especially since the trial was in absentia. The United Nations Human Rights Office described it as an important moment for victims, but expressed regret over imposing capital punishment, which they oppose universally. And then there's the massive elephant in the room: India. Bangladesh swiftly renewed demands for Hasina's extradition under their bilateral treaty, saying Delhi has a responsibility to hand her over now that she's a convicted criminal. But India has stayed silent or non-committal so far, simply noting the verdict. Why? Well, Hasina has been a close ally to New Delhi, helping curb anti-India militancy and boosting trade. Extraditing her would be a huge embarrassment and could destabilize ties further, especially with rising concerns about minority rights in Bangladesh under the new setup. Realistically, as long as she's in India, that death sentence remains symbolic. She won't face the gallows anytime soon, if ever. So, where does this leave Bangladesh? The country is still healing from the trauma of last year, with elections tentatively planned for early next year amid ongoing violence, economic challenges, and deep divisions. This verdict draws a line under Hasina's era for many, burying what some call her dictatorship, but it also risks entrenching revenge politics if not handled carefully. For the families who lost sons and daughters in those bloody streets, it's a step toward closure. For Hasina, at 78 years old and in exile, it's perhaps the final chapter of a life defined by tragedy, power, and now infamy. Whatever your view on her legacy, whether you see her as the architect of modern Bangladesh or an autocrat who overstayed her welcome, one thing is clear: this death sentence marks the end of an era and the uncertain beginning of another. What do you think? Was justice served, or is this victor's justice? Drop your thoughts in the comments, like if you want more videos like this, and subscribe for updates as this story unfolds. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.